Pregnant wife found out about Mistress. Millionaire lost house, baby, and legacy. Sometimes the perfect life that sparkles on the surface hides the darkest secrets beneath. Edward Lancaster was a self-made millionaire and the envy of everyone in town. His adoring wife, Ava, glowed with pride, especially now that she was pregnant with their first child. Few suspected that behind their gated mansion, the Lancasters' marriage teetered on a razor's edge. Whispers circulated about Edward's late-night outings and his rumored mistress rumors that Ava tried to brush aside for the sake of her unborn child. But secrets have a way of shattering even the strongest facade, and soon the consequences would upend everything. Edward Lancaster was the poster child for the American dream. Born into a humble family in Cleveland, Ohio, he learned perseverance at an early age. His parents, Matthew and Cassandra Lancaster, scraped together enough resources to send Edward to a decent public school, where he discovered his gift for business. By the time he was 18, he was taking on small entrepreneurial gigs, selling collectible sports cards, investing in secondhand computer parts, anything to make a profit. It wasn't long before everyone who knew him recognized that Edward was destined for something greater than a blue-collar life. After high school, Edward earned a scholarship to study finance at Georgetown University. He excelled, graduating top of his class. Ambitious and sharp-witted, he secured a junior analyst position at a reputable hedge fund in New York. With a knack for spotting trends, he quickly rose through the ranks. By age 30, Edward had broken off in the hedge fund to start his own investment management firm, Lancaster & Company. Using a mix of strategic planning and bold risk-taking, Lancaster & Company expanded rapidly, turning Edward into a millionaire by his 32nd birthday. Around that same time, Edward met Ava Thompson, an interior designer from an affluent family in Boston. She was soft-spoken but confident, with an eye for detail that attracted high-profile clients. At a charity gala in Manhattan, he spotted her from across the room, her long auburn hair cascading over her shoulders, her graceful posture accentuated by a silver evening gown. He introduced himself, offering a glass of champagne, and they hit it off immediately. Their romance was a whirlwind. Within a year, they were married in a lavish ceremony at the Lancaster estate. Celebrities, CEOs, and socialites mingled under twinkling fairy lights. The media covered every detail, labeling them the golden couple. Edward and Ava were young, magnetic, and brimming with promise. Life in the Lancaster mansion was meticulously curated. Ava's design background left no corner untouched. From imported Italian marble floors to crystal chandeliers, every inch exuded elegance. Edward was the consummate provider, always ensuring his wife's comfort and security. He spared no expense on exotic vacations, expensive cars, and five-star dinners. Ava, for her part, maintained a warm home. She organized fundraisers for children's charities, took care of her aging mother, and even planned to open a design school for underprivileged teens. Publicly, it looked like a storybook marriage, like they were living everyone's dream. When Ava discovered she was pregnant, the couple's popularity skyrocketed even further. Newspapers and glossy magazines fawned over the expectant mother's impeccable style. It was as if the Lancasters couldn't stop winning. On social media, fans showered Ava with congratulations, and many held her up as an icon of grace. But beneath the glitz, cracks had begun to form. Edward's once predictable schedule changed. He started coming home late or missing dinner altogether. Sometimes he was unreachable for hours, and his excuses grew increasingly vague. Ava didn't want to suspect anything nefarious. Perhaps the business was expanding and demanded more of his attention. Or maybe Edward had found new clients in far-flung time zones. Yet, her intuition nagged at her. A subtle change in his demeanor, a slight chill in the air when he walked into the bedroom, little things that made her question. She brushed them aside at first, because everything seemed so perfect. Besides, with a baby on the way, Ava was determined to keep her marriage stable and her suspicions under control. But it was only a matter of time before suspicion turned into confrontation, and the glossy veneer of the Lancasters' marriage cracked wide open. Ava tried to keep herself busy with prenatal classes, scheduling doctor's appointments, and preparing the nursery. She had painted the walls a soft pastel green, following the advice of her close friend, Dr. Michelle Harper, an obstetrician at a nearby women's clinic. Green, Ava believed, would soothe the baby and symbolize renewal and growth. Every day, she stood in the room, imagining the crib she would place near the window, the plush giraffe toy she'd bought at a boutique on Fifth Avenue. She pictured her baby's first smile, first coo, first steps. Still, as the weeks passed, Ava's heart felt heavier. Edward was more distant now. He claimed that new acquisitions for Lancaster and Company required him to fly to Los Angeles or London at a moment's notice. Sometimes he mentioned important negotiations that demanded late-night meetings. He was always either on the phone, glued to his laptop, or locked in his study. When he emerged, he appeared stressed and irritable. One evening, Ava decided to host a small dinner party for close friends and family, hoping to bring warmth back into their home. She invited her mother, Catherine Thompson, her best friend from college, Emily Peterson, and even one of Edward's older cousins, Alan Lancaster, who had recently moved back to New York. She spent hours preparing a 3-course meal: roasted lamb with garlic and rosemary, a fresh garden salad, and her famous lemon cheesecake. Edward arrived halfway through the salad course, apologizing for running late. He smelled faintly of perfume that didn't belong to Ava. It was floral, overwhelming, lingering just enough that anyone leaning close could detect it. Ava's friends noticed, but no one dared mention it, not at first. They simply pretended everything was normal, because what else could they do? Halfway through the dinner, Ava excused herself to the kitchen, her mind churning with doubt. Edward's casual disregard for time and his unusual scent rattled her. She managed to plaster on a warm smile when she returned to the dining room, determined to keep the mood light. Yet, an uneasiness settled over the evening like a thick fog. Over dessert, conversation turned to the baby. Catherine asked Edward if he was excited to become a father, recounting the days when Ava was a baby herself. Edward flashed a tight smile. "I can't wait," he replied, but there was no real spark in his voice. Later, as Ava stood to gather plates, Edward's phone buzzed. His immediate reaction was to silence it and shove it into his pocket, an instinct that didn't go unnoticed. The next morning, while Edward was showering, Ava picked up his phone from the nightstand. She only intended to check the time, but she couldn't resist the temptation to see who had called him. The screen was locked, requiring a passcode that she didn't know. A wave of confusion hit her. Why didn't she know her own husband's passcode? They never used to have secrets. He had even set up her phone once and given her the password to his laptop. Yet, here she was, feeling like a stranger in her own home. The isolation weighed on her. She tried to confide in her mother, but Catherine's advice was to be patient. "Men go through phases, dear," her mother would say. "He's under a lot of pressure. Give him time." Ava wanted to believe it was just work stress, but the perfume lingered in her mind. When she mentioned the scent to Emily, her friend's expression darkened. "I hope for your sake, it's nothing," Emily said. "But that kind of perfume, it's definitely not unisex. It's unmistakably feminine." Ava swallowed hard. Her instincts told her something was amiss. Behind the scenes, a storm of suspicion brewed. Ava didn't want to become paranoid. She didn't want to be that wife who constantly questioned her husband's whereabouts, but her intuition refused to quiet down. Little did she know her life was about to change forever. Rumors had a way of finding their way to the surface, and once the lid blew off, there would be no returning to the life she'd once known. It all started with a whisper in the halls of Lancaster and Company. Employees noticed that Edward spent a lot of time in his office with a new junior associate named Sophia Rhodes. Freshly hired from a smaller firm in Chicago, Sophia was rumored to be exceptionally talented and exceptionally ambitious. She had striking blue eyes, a cascade of raven black hair, and a poise that commanded attention wherever she went. Anyone who observed Sophia and Edward together could sense an energy crackling between them. When they discussed business projections, they did so with their heads close, voices low. Sometimes they left the office for lunch and returned 2 hours later, with Edward looking slightly flushed. Still, Lancaster and company employees weren't keen on starting gossip about the company's founder. They respected him, or feared him, enough to keep their doubts to themselves. Only small hints slipped through the cracks. An offhand comment, a knowing glance. That was all it took to start fueling speculation. The rumor began to swirl outside the office walls. In Manhattan's social circle, where lunches at the Four Seasons and cocktails at the Peninsula were breeding grounds for gossip, someone mentioned seeing Edward and Sophia together. According to that someone, a minor socialite named Teresa Van Holten, Edward had been spotted holding Sophia's hand as they exited an upscale lounge on Madison Avenue. Teresa claimed the pair appeared quite intimate, stepping into a black SUV that whisked them away into the night. Word eventually reached Ava's friend, Emily Peterson, who heard it from a mutual acquaintance. Emily wrestled with whether to tell Ava. She knew how fragile her friend was during pregnancy, and also how crucial it was to have all the facts before leveling such an accusation. But the rumor weighed heavily on Emily's conscience. She decided that Ava needed to hear it from someone who cared about her, rather than from the unkind lips of a stranger. One sunny afternoon, Emily showed up at the Lancaster mansion. She found Ava in the nursery, folding freshly laundered baby clothes. Emily started with pleasantries, asking how Ava was feeling, if the baby was healthy, if she had cravings yet. Eventually, she gently placed a hand on Ava's arm. "Ava, have you heard of Sophia Rhodes?" Emily asked, her voice measured. Ava blinked, shaking her head. "No. Why?" Emily sighed, choosing her next words carefully. "It seems Edward has been spending time with her. More time than people think is normal for a boss and junior associate. People are talking. I don't know if it's true, but I heard they left the lounge together, looking close." Ava felt her stomach twist as if she'd swallowed a jagged stone. She tried to maintain her composure. "Are you sure this isn't just gossip?" Her voice was so quiet, it was barely audible. "I wish it were just that," Emily said. "I'm only telling you because you deserve to know, especially now." For a moment, the room spun around Ava. She leaned against the crib for support, her hands trembling. She recalled the perfume on Edward's clothes, his guarded phone. The late nights pieces of a puzzle she'd tried so hard to ignore began to fit together, forming a grim picture. Ava spent the rest of the day in a haze, barely able to process Emily's words. She decided she needed some form of confirmation before confronting Edward directly. So, she called an old friend who worked in private investigations, a man named Richard Green. She asked for a discreet favor, to trail Edward on his business trips, to see if the rumors had any merit. Days turned into weeks as Ava waited for Richard's update. Her nerves stretched taut. She could hardly sleep at night. Even the baby's kicks, once a comforting reminder of a life inside her, now felt overshadowed by creeping dread. Then, late one evening, Richard called. In a hushed voice, he confirmed that Edward had indeed been meeting Sophia outside of office hours. Photos revealed them at expensive restaurants, checking into a boutique hotel in downtown Manhattan, and sharing moments that left little doubt as to the nature of their relationship. Ava's hand went numb around her phone. Edward's betrayal was out in the open now. She could no longer pretend she was imagining things. The Mistress had emerged from the shadows, and Ava's perfect world was about to come crashing down. Confronting Edward was not something Ava wanted to do in haste, but the tension inside her was unbearable. She decided to wait for him one evening in his study, a room rarely touched by the rest of the household, lined with dark mahogany shelves filled with leather-bound volumes on business, finance, and some classic literature. The study was Edward's sanctuary. When Edward arrived home, close to midnight, he seemed startled to find Ava sitting in his leather armchair, the room illuminated by a single desk lamp. He stiffened at the sight of her, as though he sensed the conversation that lay ahead. Without a greeting, he loosened his tie and tried to offer a tired smile. "You're up late," he said, his tone feigning casualness. Ava looked at him, her eyes heavy with hurt and disappointment. "I couldn't sleep," she replied. "We need to talk, Edward." Her voice trembled, but she held it steady. Edward's eyes flicked to the stack of papers on his desk, financial statements and property documents that Ava had moved aside to make room for a small envelope. Inside the envelope were several photos Richard Green had provided. Each was an irrefutable piece of evidence. Edward and Sophia holding hands, Edward pressing his lips to her temple. He reached for the envelope and saw the images. His eyes widened momentarily. Then he tried to mask his shock with anger. "What is this? Why are you spying on me?" he demanded, slamming the envelope down on the desk. "How else was I supposed to find out what's going on?" Ava asked, tears threatening to spill. "You lied to me. You've been lying for weeks, maybe months." "Why, Edward?" He shifted uncomfortably. "It's complicated," he muttered. "She's just a friend." "Don't insult me." Ava cut in, her voice cracking. "I've seen the pictures. I've heard the rumors, and I've smelled the perfume on your clothes. Do you think I'm blind?" Edward's face hardened. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he said, voice low. "Sophia and it's a mistake. Okay, it started out as a flirtation, then went further. But I never wanted to hurt you." Ava stared at the man she thought she knew so well, feeling as though he were a stranger. "You think saying I never wanted to hurt you erases what you've done?" she asked bitterly, hugging her arms around her belly. The baby kicked at that moment, as if mirroring the turmoil within her. Edward's eyes flickered to her pregnant belly, guilt evident on his face. "I'm sorry," he mumbled. "I've been under so much pressure at work with the new acquisitions, and Don't you dare blame this on work," Ava seethed. "You didn't have to find comfort in another woman's arms." Silence hung in the air, thick as fog. Edward exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I do care about you, Ava. You know I do. But the spark between us, it's been fading, and I guess I was looking for something else." Ava's breath caught in her throat. "We're about to bring a child into this world, Edward. How could you?" Tears now rolled freely down her cheeks, and she let them. "I can't believe this is the man I married, the man I gave my heart to, the man whose child I'm carrying." He took a step toward her, but she flinched. "Don't," she whispered, raising a trembling hand. "Don't you dare touch me." Edward lowered his gaze, at a loss for words. Ava pushed herself out of the armchair, feeling suddenly lightheaded and unsteady. She placed a hand on the desk for support. "What are you going to do?" Edward asked finally, his voice almost fearful. She closed her eyes, trying to gather her scattered emotions. "I don't know," she replied, honest in her confusion. "But I know I can't go on like this. You need to leave, Edward. I need time to think." His face broke into an anguished grimace. He tried to protest, but the anger and hurt in Ava's eyes silenced him. Wordlessly, he retrieved his coat and left the study. Moments later, Ava heard the front door slam, the force echoing through the empty corridors of their once happy home. Left alone, she pressed her hand to her belly, feeling the gentle stir of life within. She thought about everything at stake, the future she had planned, the baby she wanted to raise in a loving home, and the betrayal that threatened to tear it all apart. In that quiet study, Ava realized that her perfect life had shattered into a million pieces. Somehow, she would have to find a way to pick them up or let them stay broken. In the aftermath of Edward's departure, Ava felt both hollow and fiercely protective. She canceled all her social engagements, claiming health reasons related to her pregnancy. She didn't have the energy to put up a front to attend glamorous events while her marriage crumbled behind closed doors. Most nights, she found herself wide awake, replaying every happy memory, wondering if there had been signs she'd chosen to ignore. Edward, meanwhile, didn't remain idle. He bounced between the Lancaster mansion, trying to gather his clothes and important documents, and a luxury penthouse he'd apparently rented in Midtown, just blocks away from Sophia's apartment. Some nights, he tried calling Ava, but she either let it go to voicemail or briefly picked up to say, "I'm not ready to talk yet." In her sadness, Ava leaned on her mother, Catherine, and her friend, Emily, more than ever. Catherine moved in temporarily to help her daughter navigate the emotional and physical toll of the pregnancy. She made comforting soups, kept the kitchen stocked, and offered maternal embraces whenever Ava broke down, sobbing. Emily dropped by after work hours to share whatever small distraction she could, a funny story, a new cake recipe, or a puzzle to keep Ava's mind occupied. Behind the scenes, Edward's betrayal had turned into a local scandal. Paparazzi camped outside the Lancaster gates, hoping to snap a photo of the millionaire's pregnant wife or catch Edward sneaking in and out. Tabloid headlines ranged from marriage on the rocks, Lancaster caught in cheating scandal, to millionaire mogul abandons pregnant wife for younger colleague. Gossip blogs dissected every detail, fueling speculation about Ava's next move. One weekend morning, Edward decided enough was enough. Determined to smooth things over, at least to keep his name somewhat intact, he arranged a meeting with Ava at the mansion. Catherine was there, arms crossed, glaring at her son-in-law the moment he stepped inside. Ava sat quietly in the living room, her expression a mask of fatigue and disappointment. "You have a lot of nerve showing up here," Catherine snapped before Edward could even say hello. Edward cleared his throat. "I just want to talk to my wife." Ava gave a weary nod, sending Catherine a look that suggested she could handle this. Reluctantly, Catherine left them alone, but not without reminding Edward, "I'm just in the kitchen if Ava needs me." Once they were alone, Edward took in the living room. Its gentle lighting, the soft rug, the vase of fresh roses on the coffee table. How many times had he and Ava sat together on this couch, dreaming about their future? Now, the silence between them was almost unbearable. "I'm sorry," he began, his eyes downcast. "I never should have let it get this far. I don't know what I was thinking." Ava interlocked her fingers in her lap, struggling to maintain composure. "Was it worth it?" she asked quietly. "All the sneaking around, all the lies. Was it worth losing everything we built?" He hesitated, tears welling in his eyes, surprising Ava. She'd rarely seen him cry. "I was stupid, and I was lonely," he confessed. "It's not your fault. I can't explain it." Ava's frustration bubbled over. "Lonely? I'm the one carrying your child. I've been right here, trying to make our home happy, trying to support you. If you were lonely, you could have talked to me, not run off with someone else." Edward nodded shamefully. I know, and it was wrong. But please, don't shut me out entirely. Let's try to work this out for the baby's sake." She swallowed, her throat raw. "I don't know if I can trust you anymore. And trust is everything." Their conversation escalated into heated words, each trying to make the other understand the pain and betrayal. Edward pleaded for another chance. Ava, torn between her love for him and her shattered pride, couldn't provide a clear answer. Eventually, Catherine re-entered the room to end the argument. "Go," she told Edward, her voice stern. "You've done enough damage for one day." He looked at Ava, his eyes pleading, but all she could muster was a silent stare. The anguish in her gaze pierced him more than any shout could. Defeated, Edward left, walking past a cluster of paparazzi stationed on the driveway. In the aftermath, the house felt colder. Ava placed a hand on her swelling stomach and wondered about the future. She knew she needed to make decisions soon, about the child, about her marriage, about her own sense of self-respect. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that she was stronger than this heartbreak. No matter what Edward did, she still had her child to look forward to. And so, she braced herself for the battle that lay ahead. Legal battles, emotional battles, all overshadowed by the question, what would become of Edward Lancaster's fortune, name, and legacy now that his family was broken? News of the scandal spread quickly among the extended Lancaster and Thompson families. While some members were content to spectate from afar, a few decided to intervene. Edward's older cousin, Alan Lancaster, was particularly concerned. He had recently moved back to New York after a decade abroad, and he recalled a time when Edward had been a more grounded, affectionate young man. Alan arrived at the mansion one afternoon, greeted by a visibly stressed Catherine. She led him to the living room where Ava sat in a rocking chair, rubbing her belly in small circles. Her eyes looked tired but resolute. "Ava, I'm so sorry," Alan began, sitting gingerly on the couch. "I never imagined Edward would get caught up in something like this." Ava smiled weakly. "Thank you, Alan. I appreciate your concern." Alan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I know Edward. He's made a colossal mistake, but he's not heartless. I'm not excusing what he's done. I just think maybe he's lost sight of what truly matters. Catherine, who was busy tidying a corner of the room, made a disapproving sound. Lost sight? He's old enough to know right from wrong. Ava deserves better. Alan nodded. I agree. But I also think it's important for the family to communicate, to see if there's any chance to salvage what could be salvaged, if that's what Ava wants. Ava paused, considering her next words carefully. I want him to take responsibility for the choices he's made. If he wants to be in this child's life, he needs to prove he can be trusted again. I won't let him waltz in and out as he pleases. Alan tried to soothe the tension. Of course, he should face the consequences. But maybe he needs someone to remind him that he could lose more than just a marriage. He could lose the respect of his entire family. 2 days later, Alan arranged a meeting at a neutral venue, an upscale but quiet restaurant in Midtown. He invited Edward, Catherine, and, reluctantly, Ava. She almost refused to go, but Alan assured her the setting would be discreet. Reluctantly, she agreed, if only to maintain some semblance of civility for her child's sake. When Ava arrived with Catherine, Edward was already seated at a secluded booth, drumming his fingers anxiously on the table. He stood as they approached, but Catherine shot him a glare so icy that he quickly sat back down. Alan arrived moments later, carrying a folder that looked ominously like legal paperwork. Thank you all for coming, Alan began once everyone was settled. The waiter approached, but Catherine waved them away, indicating they wouldn't need menus just yet. I thought it best we handle some important matters as a family, rather than letting rumors and anger fester. Edward broke the silence. Ava, I know you have no reason to believe me right now, but I truly want to make this right. I'm prepared to do whatever it takes. Catherine scoffed. And how does Sophia fit into this plan of yours? Edward flushed, looking at his water glass. That situation is over. Ava pressed her lips together, her hands clasped over her stomach. Is it? She asked softly. Are you still working together? He glanced up. She resigned. The board at Lancaster and Company offered her a settlement to leave quietly. She took it. I haven't been in contact with her since. Ava noted the relief in his voice, tinged with regret. She could almost see the finality of it in his expression, but trust was a different matter. She wasn't sure she could believe him so easily anymore. Alan cleared his throat. Well, there's another matter we need to discuss. He opened the folder, pulling out documents. Edward's business holdings, the Lancaster estate, and the future trust for the baby. We need to establish a plan so that no matter what happens, this child is provided for. Ava blinked, her heart pounding. I hadn't even thought about that yet. Edward reached across the table, hand trembling slightly, as he slid some documents toward her. I started setting up a trust for the baby before this all happened. I want you to see that I'm committed financially and otherwise. For a moment, Ava felt a glimmer of the man she'd married. But then she recalled the betrayal, the nights he spent with Sophia, and the public humiliation she'd endured. I'll review it, she said, taking the papers. But understand this isn't just about money, Edward. He nodded, looking pained. I know, but it's a start. The conversation ended with an uneasy agreement to keep meeting, to keep talking. Ava left the restaurant feeling as though she were in a daze. The notion that her child's security depended on legal documents made everything feel transactional, cold. Yet, the practical part of her knew it was necessary. Catherine supported Ava's weight as they walked toward the car. You did well today, she whispered. You stood your ground. Ava leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. Then why do I feel so hollow? For all the talk of trust funds and financial stability, the emotional chasm between Ava and Edward still loomed large. No paperwork could heal her bruised heart. Only time, and perhaps a miracle, could do that. Inevitably, talk of finances spiraled into discussions about separation and potentially divorce. A few weeks after the meeting at the restaurant, Ava called a prominent family law attorney, Cynthia Flores, recommended by a mutual friend. Cynthia was known for her fierce representation of clients, particularly women wronged by high-powered spouses. Ava arrived at Cynthia's sleek downtown office on a Monday morning. She felt a surge of anxiety as she rode the elevator to the 35th floor. The elegant reception area smelled of fresh flowers, and behind the glass walls, attorneys in sharp suits bustled about with purpose. Cynthia greeted Ava warmly, guiding her into a spacious office lined with legal tomes. "I'm sorry you're going through this," she said, offering Ava a seat on a plush leather chair. "But rest assured, we'll get you what you need to protect yourself and your child." Ava explained the entire situation, from the moment she suspected Edward's affair to the recent discussions about a trust for the baby. Cynthia listened intently, scribbling notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions about Edward's assets, their prenuptial agreement, and the timeline of events. "You have a prenuptial agreement, correct?" Cynthia asked, adjusting the glasses perched on her nose. Ava nodded. "Yes, but I was young and in love at the time. Edward's lawyers framed it as a standard protection for his business assets. Honestly, I didn't scrutinize it too much." Cynthia's face remained neutral. "We'll need to comb through it carefully. Sometimes clauses can be challenged or negotiated, especially in light of infidelity. If there's a morality clause included." Ava felt her nerves tighten. "A morality clause? I don't remember anything like that." Cynthia clicked her pen thoughtfully. "We'll see. Even if it's not explicitly stated, judges can be sympathetic to spouses wronged by affairs, especially when there's a baby involved." They spent the next hour outlining a strategy. Ava felt overwhelmed by the sheer complexity. Potential spousal support, child support, custody arrangements, the possibility of selling or dividing properties. Every question about finances seemed invasive, but she recognized it was necessary. She left the office feeling drained yet determined. She realized she had to secure her child's future, even if it meant wading through a messy legal war. Meanwhile, Edward hired his own high-profile attorney, a man named Jonathan Pierce. Jonathan was known for representing billionaires in ruthless business deals and divorces. He reached out to Cynthia to schedule a mediation session, aiming to avoid a publicly sensationalized trial. The day of mediation arrived with a swirl of tension. They gathered in a large conference room, the walls adorned with abstract paintings, an ironic setting for such a personal battle. Ava and Cynthia sat on one side of the long table, Edward and Jonathan on the other. A neutral mediator, a stoic woman named Rachel Patterson, sat at the head, tasked with steering the conversation. Cynthia opened with a firm statement. "Mrs. Lancaster has every right to seek full custody of the child, given the emotional distress and the nature of Mr. Lancaster's extramarital affair." Edward winced at the words but said nothing. Jonathan countered swiftly. "Mr. Lancaster acknowledges his wrongdoing. However, we argue that it doesn't negate his rights as a father or his ability to provide a stable environment." Ava glanced at Edward. He looked sallow, as though he hadn't slept. She tried to detect any hint of remorse beyond legal strategy, but his expression remained guarded. The mediator asked, "Are we considering any form of joint custody arrangement?" Ava hesitated. She had envisioned a life where she and Edward raised their child together, but that vision was now clouded by betrayal. Still, she didn't want to deprive her child of a father. The conflict tore at her heart. "I'm open to discussing it," she managed finally, her voice trembling. Edward's gaze flickered in her direction, relief passing briefly across his features. The session continued for hours with discussions of visitation schedules, financial support, and property division. With each topic, tension crackled in the air. When it was over, little was finalized except a temporary agreement that Edward would contribute a monthly sum to cover Ava's prenatal and medical expenses. The rest would need further negotiation. Exiting the building, Ava felt emotionally wrung out. She placed a protective hand on her belly, as though shielding her unborn child from the toxic world of lawyers and broken promises. Edward trailed behind, desperation etched into the lines of his face. "Ava, wait," he called softly. She stopped, letting Cynthia walk ahead. "What do you want?" she asked, her tone weary. His eyes softened. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry again. This was never what I wanted for us." She swallowed hard, tears pricking her eyes. "I know," she whispered, and for a moment, she believed him. Then she remembered Sophia, the late nights, the lies. Her heart hardened again. "But it's what you chose." She turned and walked away, leaving Edward standing alone in the lobby. Outside, the paparazzi still hovered, their cameras clicking incessantly. She lowered her head, determined to shield herself and her baby from the onslaught of flashing lights. The legal battle was only beginning, and with it came the question looming over all of them. How long until everything truly collapsed? Edward's business, his reputation, and the once perfect legacy he'd worked so hard to build? As the legal proceedings inched forward, Edward tried to keep a tight grip on Lancaster and Company, but the scandal had taken its toll. Investors grew uneasy, whispering that Edward's personal problems suggested instability in his leadership. A particularly ruthless competitor in the financial sector seized the opportunity to spread rumors that Edward was making reckless business decisions. The once revered image of the Lancaster brand showed signs of tarnish. One morning, as Ava was preparing herself for yet another doctor's appointment, she scrolled through news headlines on her phone. Her breath caught in her throat at a headline: Lancaster and Company. Shares plummet amid founder's ongoing divorce scandal. Below was a photograph of Edward looking disheveled leaving the courthouse. Despite her anger, Ava felt a pang of pity. She knew how important his company was to him, how much he'd poured into it from a young age. But then she remembered the betrayal, the nights he'd stayed out with Sophia, and that pity soured into a conflicted lump of emotion she couldn't quite define. She arrived at the obstetrician's office, passing by expectant mothers who were accompanied by loving partners. Her heart ached. She managed a small smile at Dr. Michelle Harper, who led her into an exam room. The checkup was mostly positive, though Dr. Harper noted Ava's elevated stress levels. She encouraged Ava to practice relaxation techniques and consider counseling to cope with the emotional strain. Meanwhile, Edward's empire continued to unravel. Reports surfaced that he was forced to sell some of his personal properties to cover unexpected legal fees and potential settlement costs. The luxury penthouse in Midtown was the first to go. Rumors swirled that even the Lancaster mansion might be on the chopping block if the divorce settlement turned brutal, adding fuel to the fire. Sophia Rhodes reemerged publicly, granting a brief interview to a gossip magazine. She claimed Edward had pursued her aggressively, framing herself as a victim rather than a temptress. "I regret the affair," she said, batting her tear-streaked eyes for the camera. "I never wanted to ruin a marriage, let alone hurt Ava, who seems like a wonderful woman." The interview caused a media storm, painting Edward as a manipulative womanizer. Sponsors and investors at Lancaster and Company began to question his character. Stocks dropped further. From a financial standpoint, Edward faced a crisis the likes of which he had never experienced. In the midst of this whirlwind, Ava found an unlikely ally in Alan Lancaster. Realizing Edward's business was on the verge of collapse, Alan stepped in with a consortium of investors, hoping to salvage the company. His goal was twofold: to preserve the Lancaster name and to ensure that Ava and the baby wouldn't be left destitute if the company imploded. "Edward needs to step down as CEO, at least temporarily," Alan explained to Ava over lunch at a quiet bistro. "The board believes it'll restore some confidence among shareholders if he's not the public face right now." Ava picked at her salad, her appetite diminished by the stress. "Does he know yet?" Alan nodded. "We discussed it. He's angry, but he understands the alternative is far worse." 2 days later, the board forced Edward to resign from his position. They replaced him with an interim CEO, an older, respected finance veteran named Helen Cho. Overnight, the man who once commanded rooms full of billionaire investors found himself in a secondary role at his own company. Ava heard the news from Emily, who called her in disbelief. "Can you believe it?" Emily asked. Edward was unstoppable, and now it's all crumbling. Ava sighed, sinking into her living room couch. "Honestly, I don't know what to feel anymore. Part of me is sad. Part of me thinks it's karma." She recalled the times Edward boasted about his unstoppable ambition, how he believed he was above the petty dramas of ordinary life. Now, he was mired in one of the biggest scandals the financial world had seen in years. His personal shame was splashed across tabloids and business journals alike. That night, Ava stared at the empty space in her bed where Edward used to sleep. She remembered the warmth of his arms, the fluttering excitement of starting a family together. She thought of how drastically everything had changed in the span of a few months, how quickly the mighty could fall. No matter what resentments she harbored, the sight of him at his lowest rattled her. She wondered if he could ever climb out of the abyss he'd dug for himself, or if this was the beginning of his permanent downfall. In the quiet darkness, a part of her wished things could have been different, but there was no going back now. Despite losing his CEO position, Edward tried to piece together whatever fragments of his life remained. He moved back into the mansion temporarily, but not into the master bedroom. Ava refused to share the same space, so he slept in a guest suite. Catherine tolerated his presence only because she feared the stress of an ugly confrontation could harm her daughter's health. The atmosphere was tense, with the two rarely speaking directly unless it was about medical appointments or legal updates. Strangely, the crisis had humbled Edward. Without Lancaster and company to fill his every waking moment, he found himself reflecting on his actions. Late one night, unable to sleep, he knocked on the door of the makeshift nursery Ava had set up in a different part of the mansion. She was seated in a rocking chair, flipping through a baby catalog. Her eyes flickered to him, weary. "What do you want?" she asked softly. He stepped in slowly, hands in his pockets. "Just wanted to see if you needed anything." She shook her head. "I'm fine." He noticed the pastel walls, the half-assembled crib, the soft lullaby music playing from a small speaker. A pang of regret twisted his heart. "I messed up," he said quietly, letting the words hang in the air. "I ruined everything." Ava closed the catalog, looking at him with a mix of sadness and anger. "Yes," she agreed. "You did." The raw honesty stung him. He leaned against the doorframe, tears burning behind his eyelids. "I'm not making excuses, but if there's any chance at all that I can make amends, I want to try." Ava regarded him for a long moment. "It's not about grand gestures," she finally said. "It's about consistency. You can't just say you'll change, Edward. You have to show it every day without fail." He nodded, uncertain whether those words were an invitation for hope or a reminder that he was already too late. But he took them to heart. Over the following weeks, Edward tried to be present for every prenatal appointment. He listened more than he spoke, offered to drive Ava wherever she needed, and spent hours reading up on newborn care. Sometimes she let him sit with her in the living room while she knitted tiny socks, though the conversation remained minimal. Simultaneously, Edward enlisted the help of a counselor, Dr. Samuel Beckford, specializing in marital conflicts. He convinced Ava to attend a few sessions with him, just to see if they could improve communication. The sessions were tense, filled with accusations and tears, but bit by bit, something shifted. Ava admitted she still had feelings for Edward, though they were tangled in deep-seated hurt and resentment. During one session, Dr. Beckford asked Edward, "What do you see as the root cause of your infidelity?" Edward hesitated, wrestling with the question. "I was afraid," he said finally, "afraid of losing my edge at work, afraid of the commitment of fatherhood. I felt like everything was happening so fast. Ava's pregnancy, the company expansions, and I didn't know how to cope." Ava's eyes glistened with tears. "Why didn't you talk to me?" He bowed his head. "I was ashamed. You always seemed so perfect, so in control. I didn't want you to see my weakness." Their shared vulnerability filled the room. While it didn't absolve Edward's actions, it opened a tiny crack in the wall Ava had built around her heart. For the first time in months, she glimpsed the man she fell in love with, the one who had once been transparent about his dreams and fears. Outside the counseling sessions, Edward worked to mend other parts of his life. He stepped back from Lancaster and Company in an advisory capacity, letting Alan and Helen Cho handle day-to-day operations. With more free time, he volunteered at a local children's shelter, an odd choice for a man who once scoffed at the idea of wasting time on nonprofit endeavors. Slowly, his public image shifted from disgraced financier to a man seeking redemption. Still, Ava remained cautious. "I appreciate the effort," she told him one evening, "but don't mistake my acknowledgement for forgiveness. I'm still deciding if we can come back from this." He nodded, swallowing the pain of her words. "I understand." As Ava's due date approached, the two found themselves standing on a precipice. Would the birth of their child forge a new bond or finalize the end of their marriage? Each night, Edward prayed for a miracle, while Ava wrestled with her own conflicted emotions. The house, once so warm and filled with promise, now felt like a place of unanswered questions. In the stillness of late-night hours, Edward often wandered into the nursery, staring at the empty crib. He knew that for all his efforts, he might never truly reclaim what he'd lost. But a flicker of hope remained, a fragile ember refusing to be extinguished. As Ava's due date loomed, tensions reached a boiling point. Edward's attempt at redemption didn't erase the tangible consequences of his infidelity. Legal negotiations raged on, with Cynthia Flores pushing for substantial settlement, citing not just emotional trauma, but also the negative impact Edward's scandal had on Ava's well-being during pregnancy. To make matters worse, a major investor at Lancaster and Company filed a lawsuit against Edward for mismanagement, claiming that the affair and ensuing negative publicity had tanked the company's value, costing investors millions. The lawsuit threatened to drag out for years, draining Edward's resources and further damaging his reputation. Karma, it seemed, was unrelenting. One stormy evening, Ava went into labor. She was at home, resting in her bedroom, when the contractions began. Catherine rushed to her side, frantically calling Edward's phone. He answered on the second ring, his voice trembling when he heard the news. Without hesitation, he drove Ava to the hospital through pelting rain and howling wind, carefully holding her hand in the back seat. In the delivery room, Ava cried out in pain, her face contorting as another contraction rippled through her body. Edward stood beside her, sweat beading on his forehead, as if he could feel a fraction of her agony. Nurses and Dr. Harper moved about with brisk efficiency, instructing Ava to breathe, to push, to focus. The hours passed in a blur. Ava's screams filled the air, Edward's heart pounding in his chest. He found himself praying silently, offering any bargain he could think of for Ava and the baby's safety. At last, the baby's cries pierced the tension, and a rush of relief flooded Edward's eyes with tears. "It's a girl," Dr. Harper announced, gently placing the newborn on Ava's chest. Ava sobbed with joy and exhaustion, stroking the baby's soft cheek. Edward held on to Ava's hand, tears streaming down his face. In that moment, everything else seemed to fall away. The lawsuit, the betrayal, the prenuptial battles. Their baby was here, a perfect pink bundle of life representing a new beginning or a final crossroads. They named her Emily Grace Lancaster, after Ava's closest friend, Emily, who had been a steadfast source of support. Despite the friction between her parents, Emily's entrance into the world was met with universal celebration. But karma hadn't finished collecting its dues. Just days after Ava and Emily Grace were discharged from the hospital, Edward received a court summons. The investor lawsuit had escalated, and a legal team representing the investors pushed for a full-scale trial. Among their demands, an immediate freezing of Edward's personal assets to prevent him from moving funds. This meant that even the Lancaster mansion, the place where newborn Emily Grace slept peacefully in her crib, was under financial threat. Terrified of losing the roof over her daughter's head, Ava pressed Edward for answers. He paced the living room, phone in hand, speaking in urgent tones to his own legal counsel. "I don't care what it costs, Jonathan. We can't let them seize the house. My wife and baby are here." But the reality was grim. The fallout from Edward's public disgrace and the plummeting stock value had created a financial black hole. Jonathan explained that unless Edward could broker a settlement or secure new capital, the mansion might be fair game. Ava felt her heart twist, an old anger flaring up. "Your affair did this," she hissed when Edward ended the call. "You risked our entire life, our child's security. For what? He swallowed, unable to meet her eyes. He knew she was right. The ripple effects of his betrayal had morphed into a tidal wave. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, voice raw. "I never wanted this." Within a month, the legal freeze took effect, forcing Edward and Ava to vacate the mansion. The house, once a symbol of their success, now stood empty, its marble floors and crystal chandeliers collecting dust. Ava moved in with her mother for the time being, cradling little Emily Grace in her arms, trying to stay composed. As the bank officials came to change the locks, Edward, evicted from his own empire, found himself grappling with the harsh reality of losing nearly everything. The fortune he had painstakingly built, the grand estate he'd cherished, the image he'd cultivated over the years all gone, swallowed by his own hubris. Ava watched him from a distance, a part of her pitying his downfall, another part unable to forget the pain he'd caused. She resolved to focus on Emily Grace, on creating a stable life for her daughter, with or without Edward. So it was that karma finally struck Edward Lancaster. The once mighty millionaire who seemed invincible lost his house, his legacy, and threatened to lose his family entirely. The months that followed were a crucible for Edward. Stripped of his wealth and status, he lived in a modest apartment, a stark contrast to the opulence he once knew. The lawsuit dragged on, but with Alan's continued guidance at Lancaster and Company, the company slowly stabilized, though Edward's direct involvement was minimal, and his shares were largely worthless due to the freeze and subsequent devaluation. He found work as a financial consultant for small businesses, earning a fraction of his former income. It was humbling, grueling, but it was honest. Every day, he called Ava, not to plead, but to ask about Emily Grace, to offer help, to show, through small, consistent actions, that he was changing. He attended every therapy session alone, working through the deep-seated issues that led to his self-destruction. Ava, meanwhile, poured her energy into her daughter and, slowly, into reviving her interior design career. She launched the design school for underprivileged teens she had always dreamed of, finding purpose and joy in nurturing young talent. Years passed. Emily Grace grew into a bright, happy child, a beacon of light for both her parents. Edward never missed a birthday, a school play, or a parent-teacher conference. He was a constant, reliable presence in his daughter's life. Ava saw the change in him, the quiet strength, the genuine remorse, the dedication to being a better man and father. The anger in her heart had long since softened, replaced by a cautious respect. One sunny afternoon, at Emily Grace's 5th birthday party in the park, Ava watched Edward patiently teaching their daughter how to fly a kite. There were no grand gestures, no desperate pleas for forgiveness anymore. Just a man who had faced his demons and was trying, day by day, to make amends. Later, as they packed up, Edward turned to Ava. "I know I can never fully undo the pain I caused," he said, his voice sincere. "But I hope, one day, you can see that I'm not that man anymore." Ava looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not the fallen millionaire, but the father of her child, a man who had, against all odds, found a path to redemption. "I see it, Edward," she said softly, a small smile gracing her lips. "I see it." Their journey back to each other was slow, built on a new foundation of honesty and shared love for their daughter. They started with friendship, then tentative dates. The lavish lifestyle was gone, replaced by something simpler, more authentic. They bought a small house in the suburbs with a yard for Emily Grace to play in. Edward continued his consulting work, and Ava's design school flourished. They were no longer the golden couple of high society, but they were a family, rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal, stronger and more genuine than before. Their perfect life hadn't sparkled on the surface anymore. It glowed quietly from within, a testament to the enduring power of love, forgiveness, and the hard-won grace of a second chance. Thank you for joining us on this emotionally turbulent journey where secrets and betrayals were laid bare, and a once glamorous life, after crumbling, found a new, more meaningful path. If this story moved you or made you reflect on the complexities of love, loyalty, and the difficult road to redemption. Please show your support by liking this video, sharing it with friends, and subscribing to our channel. Your engagement not only helps us continue to create compelling real-life drama content, but also fosters a community of readers and listeners who love powerful storytelling. Stay tuned for more gripping tales of triumph and tragedy, where we delve deep into the human heart and unravel the hidden layers that make each person's journey unique. Thank you for watching, and remember, life can change in an instant, but even in the darkest moments, hope for a brighter tomorrow can endure. Cherish what you have and believe in the power of change.